Check your project directory. Make sure it's set to SetDrivenKey. Click OK. Go to File. We're going to load a setup scene from the Scenes folder called fingersetup.fxs. I've made a three-jointed hand, and I've created keyframes on negative frames representing different poses I want that hand to be in. I've also created a control bone, which I'm going to use different axes to control all of those fingers. But I'm going to use keyframes instead of math values to define their motion. We click into the Animate tab and show the graph editor here. You'll see that there is no animation on my control bone. We're going to use the expression %range to generate a 0 to 1 blend for all of my keyframes on these fingers. So the first thing I need to do is set keyframes on here to represent where my bone's going to be when I want the keyframes to look like this. So make sure that your channel edit settings are set to motion or all. We're going to create keyframes on the negative 3 frames, so they match up with each of the fingers. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place my control where I want it to be when these fingers are in this position. In the case of the bias, we're going to rotate bank. We're going to use the bank channel for bias. Switch to a left view. We're going to use the pitch channel for bend, and we're going to use the Z translate for kink. Let's go into the Command tab. Let's create a new variable, and under the Expressions tab, I'm going to select %range. While my Z-axis is selected, I'm going to left mouse click and load that into the buffer so I can change it. I'm going to copy and paste the original. I'm going to put an @0 inside the brackets, which will be our setup frame, and then I'm going to put an @0 - 1 inside the brackets for our blending frame. Right mouse click to add that. I'm going to call this one kink %. Go back into variables. Let's create a new one. It's going to be pitch. If we move in to frame -2, pitch is our bend. Let's go back to expressions. While pitch is highlighted, load that into the buffer. I'm going to copy that, paste it originally into the first field. Second field, @0, our setup frame. Copy and paste that into the second field. @0 - 2. It's going to check -2 for our blend frame. Paste that into the third field. Right mouse click next to the pull down to add that. We're going to name this one bend %. Go back to variables. We'll create a new variable. Switch to perspective view. Highlight the bank channel. Go back into expression. Load bank into the buffer. I'm going to copy bank into the first field. @0 setup frame into the second field. And @0 - 3. Frame -3 is our blend frame. Right mouse click to add that to the variable. Change this one to bias %. So if we move into a positive keyframe and turn on debug, we should be able to get a percentage range now on all of our axes that we've used. Excellent. Now we need to hook up Motion Blender. So go into Setup, go to the Effects tab. We're going to highlight the skeleton null. Motion Blender only works on translations, rotations, and other transforms, that is, moving things around in 3D space. The skeleton just acts as a null in this manner. We're selecting the skeleton because Motion Blender also uses the hierarchy, so it will use the entire hierarchy as animation, so we won't have to add each different joint separately. So highlight skeleton and select Motion Blender in the list and add the Motion Blender effect to it. While value is highlighted, this is our Motion Blender effect, go to value and create a new slider. We're going to call this one finger sliders. Since we're only using 3 sliders, we can right mouse click and hide the other channels. First channel we know is going to be kink. I'm going to rename the second channel to bend, and the third channel to bias. Now the first field is always the percentage that the slider is moving along. The second field is the reference frame that it's going to look for, the blending frame. We already know that kink is -1, and bend is -2, and bias is -3. So if we go back into animate and we're in positive frames, we can check out our sliders. So Motion Blender works exactly as it is in the manual. Now we need to hook these sliders up to our axes here. So while we're in animate, we can hide other channels that we don't need. For example, Y and X on translate do not need to be seen. We're only going to use Z for our channel control. When we go to rotate, we're never going to use heading. We are going to use pitch and bank. So go into Command Tab again. I'll turn off debug. We'll start with kink %. Now here's a neat trick. Turn on finger sliders. There's a little icon right next to the moving button that will let you tack it into the view. So when you select anything else, it still stays visible. So we'll highlight kink %. Select kink on the slider menu. Go to channel. Check mark next to the pull down menu to make an active selection load. And just add that finger sliders. And it'll show up as kink. Go to bend, select the next expression, add that, bias %, next expression, add that. The execution to motion, which means Messiah is going to wait till everything's finished, check this value, and then apply that value to the Motion Blender sliders. So we'll double check our work. If we move this on Z, we kink everything up, we bank it, the bias works, and pitch bends everything up and down. So we've consolidated 3 controls into 3 axes on one bone. The advantage of this is you can delete all 3 controls at one shot. Let's go to File. I'm going to save this scene as SetDrivenKey _ motion blend.